In 1963, we saw some statistics that showed us some very scary things that are very real and that I think that people should know about.
So, what had this horrible impact on planet Earth? What happened in 1963? Let's see. What was I doing in 1963? I was two. I was just becoming self aware and starting to have an impact on the world around me. Oh no. Was it me? Did I cause this catastrophic cataclysm? Let's find out. Let's have a chat. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. Matt's video is only 2.5 minutes long, but he packs so much wrong stuff into it that it will take me about 30 minutes to get to it all. How can you tell when Matt Powell is wrong? It's when his lips are moving. Let's start with the source of his claims about stats.
And one of the best ways to determine that which is fact is by using statistical methods.
Is it, though? Statistics are only as good as the person who is drawing the inference from them. Statistics can be manipulated to get to almost any result that you want if you don't use them honestly. And don't forget, 75% of statistics are made up on the spot. Not really. I made that up. Think Matt will give us an honest view of his statistics, or will he manipulate them to show what he wants them to show? Tune in tomorrow, same bat time, same bat. Just kidding.
Statistically, since 1963, violent crimes have gone up 995%.
The Statistical Abstracts of the United States. Cool. This is a reputable source. Until 2010, this was published by the U.S. government and was information that was free online. Unfortunately, after that, it was taken over by ProQuest, and the book is only available for a substantial fee. I checked my local library, and they don't have a copy. But here is a copy of the statistics in the most recent free publication, which goes to the year 2007. As you can see from Matt's own source, the violent crime rate in the United States has been steadily dropping from 1998 to 2007, a dramatic difference from what he presents in his slide. When the rate is adjusted for population change, the drop becomes even sharper. This slide is the closest that I could find to what Matt is using. If it is, it's not only dishonest in the cutoff on the dates, as there is clearly a dramatic drop after 1995, which would correlate to about here on Matt's chart, which continues to show a steady increase. Matt's chart also shows a significantly higher number of crimes for the entire data set. Matt is deceptive in not including any data from the last 20 years, which clearly shows him to be wrong. If taking the Bible out of schools was in fact the cause of the uptick of crimes in the 70s and 80s, why would crime now be trending downward in the last 20 years, despite those Bibles still being out of school? The case could be made that the drop in violent crime correlates to the rise of the nuns, those that have no religion in particular, to the secularizing of society. And of course, correlation isn't necessarily causation. We'll get to that in a bit.
That is very, very, very serious. Something happened in 1963 that caused violent crimes to increase substantially. In 1963, percentage of teenage girls who had had premarital sex had skyrocketed as well.
Again, his stats are way off, according to multiple sources. Here are two government studies of roughly the same time frame, and the results aren't even close. You don't go over 50% until after the age of 18, the age of adulthood, and none of them reach 60%, let alone 70, as Matt claims. Second, he again cuts off at 1990, because the numbers start dropping after that. Can't have that. The data wouldn't fit the narrative. Oh no. Next, the sexism in his issue is problematic. The percentage of teenage boys that have premarital sex is greater than that of girls. So why does he only report on girls' sex and not boys? Is it okay for boys to have premarital sex, but not girls? Sex is only okay for gay teens, but not for straight teens? I checked to see if he has any male figures coming up. He doesn't. And again, any correlation to the Bible not being read in schools isn't necessarily causation.
Sexually transmitted diseases from kids aged 10 to 14 has gone up 385%.
Now, I will agree with Matt that this is a moral failure, but it's not a moral failure for the reasons that Matt is claiming. If 10 to 14-year-olds are getting STDs, it isn't the fault of the 10 to 14-year-olds. This is not consensual sex. These are children. They cannot consent. Whoever they are getting the STDs from is committing a crime. Don't blame the kids for not reading their Bibles. Blame the adults that are committing these crimes. The adults that likely heard the Bible read in their schools when they were growing up, and despite having been raised hearing the Bible daily, began sexually abusing children in the 1970s. Matt, you should note here, your chart does show this falling sharply after about 1990, coinciding with the drop of violent crime, which makes sense as this is a violent crime.
Unmarried couples living together has gone up 725% since 1963.
Hey, he got one right. Again, his stats are a bit old, but that trend has continued. It reflects not that people aren't reading their Bibles, but that social norms have changed. Until the 1960s, cohabitation was frowned on. The sexual revolution of the 60s made it more normal. This chart shows the trend has continued, but it is more prevalent in the young than in people my age. Though I grew up in the midst of the sexual revolution, many in my generation didn't completely embrace it. We accepted it as normal, but we didn't engage in it. So it makes sense that our kids, who were not raised to think that there was anything wrong with cohabitation, would engage in it. Because this is a common acceptable practice, if Matt has an issue with it, he should be telling us why. What is wrong with it? Does it lead to issues in relationships? Does it lead to a poorer environment for children to grow up in? These are legitimate questions, and there is some evidence on both sides. But just saying that this is happening as if it is self explanatory goes to show just how out of touch with reality Matt is. This is reality. This is where the culture is. Matt, if you want to make a video on social issues, at least engage the issues. Just saying lots of people are living together unmarried and you don't like it doesn't cut it. We really don't care about your personal preferences. I mean, what did you expect? People to watch your video and say, Jack, you need to move out. We can't live together anymore because Matt Powell doesn't like it. If you want to convince an audience that cultural norms are problematic, at least present what makes them problematic. And of course, again, correlation does not equal causation. You want to link this to Bibles no longer being read in schools, but is there a link? Is the reason fewer people lived together before the 1960s because the Bible said no? For that matter, does the Bible even say no? In fact, it doesn't. It forbids adultery, which is sleeping with a married person that you are not married to. But nowhere does it say don't live together before marriage. Modern believers imply this into the text based on the bans on adultery. I was taught in church that it was common practice in Jesus' day that when a couple was engaged, the bride went to live with the groom's family. When the groom had enough money saved to get a house for the two of them, then the marriage would take place and they would go to their new home. It was common for this to take years. Often the couple had kids before the wedding. It was supposed to be a sign that God had blessed the union, that they had kids before the marriage. It's why some Christians say that Joseph marrying Mary while she was pregnant wouldn't be a scandal. It would be considered normal and even a sign of blessing. But I've also heard other believers dispute this and say that it was a scandal. I don't know for sure, and I don't care enough about it to research it. If it ever becomes a relevant issue, I will. The real question is, since cultural norms say it's okay, and the source you claim is the issue, a lack of Bible reading, doesn't say it's not okay, why is this even an issue for you?
Divorce rates have also skyrocketed. since 1963.
This one I actually know quite a bit about, and it has nothing to do with the Bible. First, he's got an arbitrary line that he calls 1963, when in fact his slide shows the slope starting to swing upward a bit before the line. But the divisions are odd. There are 2 marks between 1950 and 1960, 2 between 1960 and 1970, and again to 1980, but only 1 between 1980 and 1990. Maybe they just put 1990 in the wrong spot, but still, each mark would be about a third of a decade, or about 3 1/3 years, which would make Matt's line for 1963 really closer to 1965. But since the slope starts sooner, had he put the line in the right spot, it would be closer to 1963. My guess is that it isn't really Matt's fault as he didn't make the slides. I'm not sure on that one. If he did a poor job in choosing slides that accurately illustrate his talking points. But the real uptick in divorce doesn't begin until 1972. These kids that are no longer hearing the Bible in school that started school in 1963 are still in school in 1972. They would be about 14 years old now and still in high school. So how are they getting divorced? The adults that are getting divorced at this point heard the Bible in school when they were kids. It doesn't seem to have helped any. So why point to the Bible no longer being read in schools as the reason that adults are getting divorced? What really happened to bring about the upswing in divorce was no-fault divorce. Ronald Reagan, as then governor of California, signed into law the first no-fault divorce statute in 1969. Prior to that, divorce was only granted on a fault basis. One partner had to prove that the other had broken the marriage contract, either by adultery, abandonment, mental or physical cruelty, or some other reasons. The problem was when a couple agreed to divorce, the only way to do it legally was to make something up. Courts had couples coming in confessing to adultery in lurid detail, with no objections. The parties already had an agreement on the terms, which the court would then grant. It was silly. Everyone knew the adultery stories were false. Why force people to commit perjury and then perpetuate a fraud on the court to achieve this result? If the 2 parties agree they want to terminate any other contract, they can do so. They don't have to prove a breach of the contract. So why so with a marriage contract? Thus was born the idea that there needs to be a vehicle to achieve this result without having to resort to lies. And now we have no-fault divorce. Once no-fault divorce became an option, more couples chose it, and thus the uptick in divorce. Reading the Bible had nothing to do with it, at least not directly. Indirectly, it actually did. The rationale behind requiring a party needing to prove fault to obtain a divorce does stem back to religious influence. Religious influence on law prior to the founding of this country. It goes back to merry old England and traditional law that was brought over with the Pilgrims. It was modified over the years, but the original roots are in church influence over law. But since the court doesn't recognize any authority of the church in U.S. law, this has been no more than a cultural norm for almost 2 centuries, before it was finally done away with entirely as the culture changed. What I would like to know is how Matt thinks that this correlation works. Does Matt think that couples were sitting around at home in 1963 all saying, "Hey, Martha, they aren't teaching the kids the Bible in schools anymore. Let's get divorced"?
Illegal drug abuse has gone up 6,000% since 1963.
This is a serious problem. Unlike violent crime, this is still one of the biggest problems that our nation faces. But again, correlation is not causation. Even Matt's slides tell a different story than he does. The real uptick is in the 1970s, not 1963. Also, the slide says the problem is that youth are being taught evolution. Right. The kids are all saying, "Wow, now that I know about evolution, I need some drugs." Matt wants the correlation to be that anyone that doesn't hear the Bible falls into moral failure. The problem with that theory is twofold. First, those inside the church, those still hearing the Bible on a regular basis, are no less prone to moral failure. The latest church scandal is the list of 700 preachers in the Southern Baptist Convention. The convention has hidden their crimes so that they can continue as sexual predators within their churches. This is not unique. The moral failings of preachers and believers goes back throughout history. Unbelievers have moral failings too, but at no greater rate than believers. In fact, more secular societies and even more secular regions of the United States have lower crime rates, lower instances of teen pregnancy, less drug use, higher education. The list goes on. Reading the Bible does not get you to a better society.
And child abuse rates have gone up astronomically, 2,300% since 1963.
Again, his line at 1963 is arbitrary since the graph shows the real uptick in the 1970s. This is a horrible thing. It should be noted, though, that his slide is a bit misleading. This is child maltreatment. 80% of cases of child maltreatment is neglect, not abuse. The number one cause of child neglect is drug use by parents. The parents get hooked on drugs and they stop taking care of the kids. Thus, a rise in child maltreatment during a correlating uptick in drug use is expected. These graphs show that child abuse and neglect have been dropping in the past couple years, with 2019 as having the lowest incidence of child abuse and neglect in the last 5 years. And we know it isn't dropping because kids are hearing the Bible in schools. What's more, the Bible tells you to beat your child. If anything, child abuse might go down when people stop believing in the Bible. Seriously, Matt, it's the drugs. Kids are being neglected because their parents are on drugs. Get rid of the drugs, and we seriously reduce the child neglect. We don't solve the problem by bringing the Bible into schools. Think about it, Matt. How would that even work? Do you honestly think that if a child is being abused, if a teacher reads a Bible to the child in school, whoever is abusing the kid will stop? Do you think adults are abusing kids because the kids don't hear the Bible? Matt, use your brain.
So you have to ask the question, what happened in 1963 to be able to cause something like this to happen? In 1963, they took the Bible out of the school.
Finally, a good question. If all of this was linked to 1963, which, as you saw, his graphs do not, but if they did, what were the major events that shaped the nation that happened in 1963? The biggest one was the assassination of JFK. Do you honestly think that all of these events could be linked to the loss of JFK? People couldn't take the news and they turned to drugs, which in turn led to crime to support the drug habits and led to the neglect of children. People strung out on drugs no longer cared about their spouses and got divorced, and the young that wanted another coping mechanism all engaged in premarital sex. I can make a better case for all of this being linked to the assassination of JFK than you can for it being linked to reading the Bible in schools. And I don't believe a word of my own explanation. Because I know that social ills are a multifaceted problem. To try to tie them all to a single event is a high school level way of thinking and not a well reasoned argument. Matt here is barely out of high school, and I don't think he's had any education since. So it's not surprising that he would come up with a poorly thought out causation scheme like this one. What's sad is the number of people who actually think he's onto something. Here's a few of the comments on that video. Most amusing is that most of his viewers are my age. On the other hand, most believers are my age too. The younger generations just aren't buying this crap.
So they took out the Bible and they took out prayer, and it was replaced with the origin of species by means of natural selection and Darwinian evolution.
He has a number of things confused here. The two landmark cases that took the Bible out of schools in 1962 and 1963 are Murray versus Curlett and Abington School District versus Shemp. Engel versus Vitale, decided in 1962, got rid of school prayer. These were being done as morning exercises, not as part of a science class or an educational curriculum, which is what the parties argued to the court. They argued that this is just a social moray, like prayer in the legislative branch of government before the start of business. Madeline Murray argued that her son was denied equal protection under the law, as he was forced to participate in prayer and Bible reading that he didn't believe in. The lower court sealed the fate of its decision and of the nation by absurdly claiming, as to the claim that the pupil was denied the equal protection of the laws guaranteed him by the 14th Amendment, equality of treatment, which the 14th Amendment affords, does not provide protection from the embarrassment, the divisiveness, or the psychological discontent arising out of nonconformance with the mores of the majority. But this is exactly what the 14th Amendment does protect. It protects the rights of all citizens to be free of government ridicule from deviating from social norms. Matt here wants to restore Bible reading as part of a public school practice. He wants his beliefs set up as government sponsored beliefs. He doesn't just want to be able to practice his faith, he wants kids to be forced to hear about his faith in school. Now, if this was part of a study on world religion, that would be fine. Religion is a part of life, and a study of religion in history and culture are legitimate areas of study for public schools. And it still is. The Bible is still taught in public schools, legally, as part of a course of study about religion, as long as other religions are included as well. The Bible can also be taught as part of a course of study about literature. It is good literature, and it is a legitimate source of material for study of ancient literature. Again, this kind of Bible teaching in public schools is still legal and is still done. What Matt wants is for the Bible to be read as truth, that this is true. This would be a government endorsed religion. I seriously doubt that Matt would be on board if the predominant religion was not his religion, and a person of another faith wanted to read their holy book to school children as truth. If his kids were subjected to hearing that a different faith is the real faith, and that came from a teacher hired by the government, I'd be willing to bet that Matt would be first in line to complain. Next, Matt claims that the Bible was replaced by Darwinian evolution. Does he honestly think that before 1962 teachers were using the Bible in science class? And that when they got rid of the Bible, they had to get real science textbooks? Or does Matt think that morning exercises, where they read the Bible, said a prayer, and then said the Pledge of Allegiance, was replaced by reading from Origin of the Species before saying the pledge? Having gone to school in that era, I can tell you that we did not. We recited the pledge. That was it. I had never even heard of Origin of the Species until high school, and to this day I have still never read it. I first heard about evolution in about 6th grade in history class. We were studying ancient history. This chart, which is now outdated, was part of the lesson. I remember it because my teacher was so passionate about it. She kept saying over and over that this was all so interesting. At no point do I ever recall her ever making a comment about faith, the Bible, or what anyone should believe.
When they took God out of the schools, we saw a rapid decline of the morality of the United States of America. And I'm sorry, when you teach your child that he's nothing more or she is nothing more than a primate that evolved from fish to fisherman, gu to you, zu to you over millions of years, it's going to destroy their faith.
If teaching the truth destroys someone's faith, the problem isn't with teaching what is true. The problem is having had a faith in a falsehood in the first place. But Matt is again just flat out wrong. There are plenty of people who understand evolution to be true, but also have faith. Understanding evolution doesn't necessarily lead to atheism. What it does destroy faith in is Matt's particular version of faith, not all faith. Matt, have you ever considered the possibility that God could be a little different than the way you think he is? If reality doesn't fit your doctrine, you can't change reality, despite Matt trying so desperately to do so. You can change your doctrine because, newsflash, not all doctrine is right. Even most Christians will agree to that statement.
And it's going to also destroy their ability to think critically.
How? How can learning about evolution destroy a person's ability to think critically? Even if Matt was right and evolution was all wrong, learning about it wouldn't destroy one's ability to think critically. If anything, it would further it as a person seeks to disprove evolution. What does destroy a person's ability to think critically is just accepting a religion on faith, especially on the say-so of an uneducated, just barely out of his teens kid that doesn't know how to draw reasonable conclusions from statistics.
And this is what we have today, is a group of people that have lost the ability to think. They've lost the ability to use reason and free thought. And they have gone out and destroyed their lives. And young people across the entire world now are being taught this, and it's destroying them.
Matt seems to be making an accurate summation of his own life. He has lost the ability to think. He has lost the ability to use reason and free thought. Instead, he blindly follows Kent Hovind. I hope he has not destroyed his life. He's young. There is still time for him. He doesn't have to let this destroy him. He just needs to see that those of us that don't believe like he does don't have these miserable, crime-filled lives that he claims. Maybe he needs to get to know us before condemning us. So Matt isn't claiming that I was the cause of the downfall of U.S. society. Whew, that's a relief. But he might as well have been, as he demonstrated as much causation of the social ills to the loss of the Bible in schools as he did to my becoming self-aware in 1963. Live your life